Part of being savvy, effective writers means not only borrowing ideas that come from elsewhere, but then to be able to synthesize those ideas with our own. So blending them in, incorporating, integrating those ideas with our own. And we do that through paraphrasing, quoting, summarizing, some combination of those things, or otherwise blending those ideas in with our own. But when we do that, when we borrow from outside, we need to be certain that we are documenting where those ideas have come from. In other words, that we are citing where those ideas are coming from. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about documentation, and we'll notice here on the screen, the first page I have up, it says documentation styles, plural. There's an S on this. So already, this should give you a clue that there's more than one documentation style. Many students maybe assume that MLA is the only way to cite something, and it could be for a particular class, but it is not the only citation or documentation style that exists. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that in this video. I'm starting with a page that comes from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, their writing center, and the information is here at the top if it's something that you want to look up, and it further explains what documentation styles are. But one way to think about it is these are the conventions that the audience would expect your writing to take. So not just in terms of maybe the subject matter that your audience would expect, but then how you lay it out and how you point to where those sources have come from. Different disciplines or professions will have different rules for that, and those rules are referred to as the documentation styles. It can become a little bit confusing, especially for students, but as I'll show later in the video, there are many resources available to help us build those citations. No one is expected to know all of the different styles that exist. Instead, it's a good idea to know how to find a manual to help you build a citation. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is, what are they exactly? And again, I said it's the conventions, the rules for how to document where sources come from. It says here on our University of Wisconsin-Madison page, a documentation style is a standard approach, so in other words, conventions, to citations of sources that the author of a paper, in this case, we're going to talk about an academic paper. I'll come back to this in a minute. So the citation sources that the author of a paper has consulted, abstracted, or quoted from. So it's the standard approach, a set of conventions, a set of rules. That's really what we're talking about. Now, to come back to this idea of paper, most of the time in college, you're writing an academic paper, something for a class, something that goes in to be graded, etc. But what is important to keep in mind is that while some of the resources that I'm going to look at here are specific to academic papers, different academic disciplines have different citation methods that they follow or different documentation styles that they follow. So that's important to know. And two, in the workplace, you should be citing where you get your information from. You should be documenting where you get your ideas from. So some of the things I'll take a look at today, you may never use in a class, but in your job, you may be expected to use. So again, as a writer, you should know how to find the manuals, how to get some help with that. Also, what your audience expects of you. So the next source I'm going to take a look at comes from Harvard, and they have, again, really good resource kind of overall for using sources, and even including things like integrating, etc. But we can see here that they have pretty standard MLA. So this is usually the citation method most students know. MLA comes from the Modern Language Association, and the disciplines that use MLA are often humanities courses. So English, art history, visual arts, literature, some of those courses you would be using MLA. It's also pretty standard for a lot of high schools in the United States to use MLA. So the Modern Language Association, the Modern Language Association are the ones who create the rules for this, and they put out a handbook and they do the updates, and the rest of us who use this citation method, we follow it. So it's their set of rules and the way that they are organizing information in citations. But we also see that our Harvard Guide shows us APA. APA is for the American Psychological Association. Disciplines that may use APA would include things like sociology or nursing, social sciences use APA style. Our Harvard Guide also gives us other styles. So Chicago or Turabian, The major difference between these is that Turabian reduces some of the expectations from Chicago so that it's easier for students to use. But you may see that in a history class, or you may see that in an upper level, even in an upper level writing class, you may end up using Chicago. But what we can see here is that there are a few other, or at least a couple of other styles that are listed in the Harvard Guide. We also see links that take us to outside of this page that show us how to use those various citation methods or those documentation styles. So going to another resource, we have a page that gives us instructions on various citation styles. And this comes from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, their university library system. We see that they have instructions for APA, so American Psychological Association, MLA, Modern Language Association. They actually have a couple of editions here. We see that they have something for Chicago. What's important here is that, again, who is your audience and what are they expecting for your work? There are a couple of different ways to cite in Chicago. And so if you're in a class and your professor says use Chicago, then you would have a better sense of what style of Chicago. If you're in a workplace, you would have a better sense based on either what your coworkers are telling you or maybe what your business follows overall. But you should always ask somebody else, like, what is our style that we're using here? We also see listed on this UNC site really one other style that wasn't listed on the Harvard one. And CSE comes from the Council of Science Editors. CBE is the Council of Biology Editors. So these are sciences citation methods or documentation styles. And so here on this site, we have some manuals that would help us build if that's what our requirements are. And if I click on one of those links, we'll see here in terms of the resource, an explanation of the style guide, and then examples of what it needs to look like. So overall, let's go back a little bit. Here is a source that shows a list of style manuals that exist. And again, I'm not showing this to you to overwhelm you, but instead to say, not everything is MLA. And different professions, different disciplines have their expectations for the way that information gets listed in a text and then in a references or a works cited or a bibliography. So where does the information come from, etc. So if we take a look, I'm just going to scroll through this a little bit. We can see there are a lot of citation styles that exist. Again, you as writer should know what the expectations are before you start writing your document, or even before you turn it into somebody or hand it to somebody. I'm going to look at another page. This comes from Wikipedia. This is a longer list of style guides, and it shows us a bit. We've got international guides. There's guides related to country. If I come down here to the United States, the way that this page is broken down, we see there's general writing, there's legal writing, academic, and this is what a lot of students are used to. And here are some of our usual suspects with Chicago, etc. But then there's ones for journalism, electronic publishing, business, computer industry, etc. So again, lots and lots of style manuals. You as writer need to know what is expected by your audience and what is the discipline or the profession that you're writing for. What are their expectations? I'm going to move forward. Here's a website, a web page. The title of this article is Top 14 Content Style Guides for 2020. What's particularly interesting about this, as I scroll down, is that if I go back to the Wikipedia page, we see some of the ones, again, that we're maybe used to seeing or that we might expect. So the Associated Press, that seems like it would have its own. Wall Street Journal has a guide, that kind of thing. But what you may not realize is that sometimes individual companies have style guides. And so here's one. You may have heard of the company MailChimp that has to do with emailing, etc. They have a style guide. And right here on this article, they're calling it the Holy Bible of content style guides. People outside of MailChimp use it to write their own documents because they find it so effective. Microsoft has its own writing style. There's not only in terms of citing things, but in how things should be laid out, how things should be incorporated, etc. So there's a lot that goes into documentation and style. The documentation part is citing it. Where does it come from? The style part can be everything from the layout to how we hyperlink it or don't, how much information goes in. There's a lot of other stuff that's there. Again, I'm not saying this to overwhelm you, but to say be aware, know what's out there, know what your audience expects of you. but also know the purpose of your document. So sometimes knowing what it's for and where it's going, who your audience is, all of that can help you understand or maybe make decisions about the documentation style that you should be using. Know the level of expertise that your audience has. And, if you're not sure what the citation method should be, ask somebody who would know. Again, thinking through that the reason that we are citing things, or the reason that we are writing things in particular ways, and I'm going to point this out for things even with MailChimp or Microsoft, or coming back to this list of these long lists of things, is that citation is not simply giving credit where credit is due, although that is a big part of it. It's also showing that you, the writer, are joining a conversation with other experts. It shows that you have expertise, that you have knowledge that the audience expects, etc. And it shows that you know how to follow the conventions, that you understand what your audience views as important and how they would lay that out. So the same is true if it's an academic style or a business style. Find out what the expectations are for your document. So to try to help out, now it's possible that you have something at your fingertips. So if you have a book, for example, sometimes textbooks that you have for class, they may have the citation information in it, at least in very brief ways. So this example of a textbook has APA described and some of the basic ways of citing things in APA. It also has a citation method called IEEE, and this is often for engineering and a few other things. And so it gives us the instructions for some of the basics of IEEE. Same with MLA. Often, though, in a textbook, even the same is true when you're looking at a citation generator online, it isn't going to show you every possible way of citing something. So it's a good idea to know how to find manuals or how to find more help. So what I'm going to do is a really quick search here. So let's say, for example, that you know that you have to cite something in APA. If you do a quick search on Amazon for APA, you can call it documentation style or citation style, and then we're going to sort by site-specific operator. And in this case, this means it's going to filter out some of the things that we're looking for. I know that educational institutions usually have style manuals available for students. And so if I type in APA documentation style space site:/edu and I do a search, what I'll get back are hits for various institutions, usually colleges or universities, that give me instructions for APA documentation. I could do the same thing with MLA. Documentation style site:/edu, no spaces in between those. And again, I'm going to come back to these institutions, these upper level, usually higher ed institutions that give me the manuals or that give me instructions for how to document in these various citation methods. I could also try something that maybe isn't quite as common, or if I want to talk about journalism and I don't know what the method is called, but I know I need to cite something related to journalism, I could still do journalism documentation style site:/edu, and I may be able to find something if enough universities are giving me this information. But I also could get rid of the operator for site type and just do a search for journalism documentation style. Something else I can try is searching with and without quotation marks. And so if I know that I want to look for a manual for help on Microsoft documentation or Microsoft style, I'm actually come back to Microsoft style. If I put that in quotation marks, if it's spelled right, I can do a search and Google will look for everything with that phrase, Microsoft style, in the quotation marks. I can continue by putting that site operator back in to see if there's something else that comes up, and we can see by a quick search. Here are a couple of the manuals that pop up to give me help for how to build the citations. So overall, again, thinking about giving credit is important, but there's a lot more to citing than just making sure that there's a reference in the body of our work. We're joining conversations. We're showing other experts that we know what to do. We are joining professions and the expectations that those professions have for us. And we are showing that we ourselves can use the conventions.